And good morning, everyone. It is another Chat CANNA. The days are going by in October. I cannot believe it. Sugar beet harvest is going really, really well this year. And we are so thankful after 2 years of absolutely the worst harvests you can imagine. Soybeans, sunflowers, everything is in process in the northern Red River Valley. And all we can say is be careful out there. Just be careful out there. There's not been some rains that have come along every couple of days that give the drivers a bit of a respite. So just yield to the drivers. That's all we can say. Just, they may not see your little car. Stay out of their way. Let's have a nice, safe harvest. It's been going pretty good so far. Let's keep it that way. A wonderful, wonderful show for us today on Chat CANNA. An amazing guest. But first, my co-host here, Veronica Michael from Prairie Products down in Fargo, North Dakota. Good morning, Veronica. How are you?
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm on top of the world. I must have got some of those steroids that they're giving out to the big shots out in Washington or something. I don't know. I don't know what happened. I had my little typical morning breakfast and not a drop of coffee yet. But I'm feeling really good. Let's do an introduction. We have with us, of course, since this show is about hemp, this is just an awesome guest today. Because if you're on the Minnesota side of the river and you're talking about hemp, everybody knows our next guest. She is your first contact, and she is your contact along the way if you are in the Minnesota pilot program for hemp. Now it's going to be evolving into the new program. But Margaret Wiatrowski has just been the most awesome person. There isn't a conference you can go to or a chat. I can call anybody in the hemp business in Minnesota, and I promise you I should have a stopwatch because we will not be 3 minutes into the conversation and we're going to embarrass her before we go too far. But Margaret's name comes up, and that's because she has been there from the start. She was on the team that developed the program that got approved by the feds to say, yeah, you can have hemp in Minnesota. And she has been there hands-on from day one, working with all of the farmers, the processors, the growers, any different kinds of titles you want to put on it. She has been the pivot program person. Fortunately, she now has help, so it's not all on Margaret's shoulders. But it's just been a wonderful ride, and we are so thankful here because I know that I can send her an email at 2:00 in the morning, and within the I can just leave it because I know that at some time in her cycle of working, she will see it. She will get back to me. I don't have to think about it. Other people, you got to, 6 hours later, you got to kind of remind them, you send them an email or whatever and do that. But I can just, yep, I sent it to Margaret. She will get back to me. I go on with my other things. So here she is. Margaret, thank you so much for being with us on Chat CANNA today. And we're going to just sit back and let you talk for the next hour.
No, all right. Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, it's just a pleasure to have you on the show. And I remember, actually, I think it was on the same NDSU program or something where I first saw you because we had talked for a couple of years now. And all of a sudden you were in one of the chat rooms and I'm going, wow, that's Margaret. It was just such a joy to put a face because you don't have your picture anywhere on the Minnesota State program web pages or anything. So
Margaret, so since
great to see you.
John is so starstruck, why don't you give us your title and give us a little bit of information for our listeners who may not know you about your position?
Oh, I've got it.
Yeah. Sure. So my name is Margaret Wiatrowski. I'm the Hemp Program Coordinator for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the state agency. So basically with the hemp program in Minnesota, there are essentially 3 of us. There's myself, and I kind of like run the program on a day-to-day basis. My supervisor, his name is Tony Cordelet. So a lot of you probably have met him as well. He works half-time on hemp and half-time on the noxious weed program. And then my coworker, Katie Muchler, she is full-time on the hemp program as well. And she does a lot of the like sending out, letters when crops have been tested and doing the actual inspections and that kind of thing. So there's essentially 2.5 of us. And our program has been established since 2016. That was the very first year of any legal hemp cultivation in Minnesota. So we're just wrapping up our 5th year.
Wow.
Wow. How many growers in Minnesota are there of hemp this year, or licensee holders?
Yeah,
Could be a lot more growers.
yeah. This year we had about 580 applications to the program, and we have about 450 growers licensed. Things were weird this year, obviously, we all know, with COVID. So we actually had issues towards the end of our application period where people were applying but then not able to get fingerprinted because all the law enforcement offices were shut down. And so we ended up getting more applications than actual licensees, just because of that issue with the getting fingerprinted and completing the background check. But yeah, about 450 growers, and there's about 200 licensed processors. So, there's overlap there. Obviously, some people hold a grower and a processor permit. But people are always kind of shocked to hear that, whoa, there's 200 hemp processors in Minnesota.
I was just going to
And
say that.
there are, but under the pilot program rules, anyone that was doing any kind of processing with hemp at all had to hold a license. So a lot of people would just get it just to have it. And then, even people who are doing very small scale processing or even for their own use had to hold that permit. But once we move into the commercial licensing program, so only processors who are processing for commercial purposes will need to hold that license. So I think the number of people that will be getting that license will go down slightly.
There's on the Minnesota site, there used to be a giant list of all of the growers and everything, and now it's really a rather short list.
Yeah, that list is interesting. I think it's misunderstood a little bit as far as so I have a lot of people who contact us and say well, we're not on the list. I mean, we have a license, but we're not on the list. As long as we have been operating as a pilot program, the participants in pilot programs in general in Minnesota that's considered private and classified information. So we have to keep all the names and data and locations of all the pilot program participants private and protected unless people specifically sign a consent form to release their data. So in order to appear on that list that's on our website, you have to sign a consent to release form and submit it to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it just because of how our application works. So last year, everything was done through DocuSign. So they could just basically click a button to sign that form. And so lots of people did it.
And I thought we had
this
all
year
of them.
it was all done through paper, through the mail. And so it's just human nature. People just aren't as likely to sign it and return it if it's a paper form. So that's what happened. I mean, we have more licensees this year than we did last year, but just not as many people who actually submitted the form. But once the pilot program ends and we move into the commercial licensing program, we will not be, we will not be able to legally protect, or we won't have the obligation to protect and keep private all that information. So we'll become public information. So we won't maintain that specific list anymore. But what will happen is people can, file essentially a freedom of information data request and get the names. if that makes sense.
Sure.
That makes
sure.
sense.
Yeah,
I mean, for processors like us, that was important when we started to be able to reach out to regional farmers to ask. But on the other hand, as someone that respects privacy, I'm glad to hear that it was a consensual form. It's the magic of Facebook, right? You'll give it away when you don't know what's happening in front of you, all your privacy. But yeah.
Yeah, one kind of interesting one extra nuance to that is that we felt that it was actually important to continue to keep the actual physical locations, like the physical grow locations and processing locations, private due to safety concerns. And then
Security.
also there's a lot of theft issues that go on. And so we did ask the legislature to write into our statute specifically to keep just the location, the physical grow and processing location information private. So that will be the only piece of information that we will continue to keep private, but the names of the licensees and their like business addresses, that kind of thing will be private. Or public, I'm sorry, public.
That's great though for security to have that. That's very thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you think going into it? I know that, you don't come from a hemp study or anything before this. So what was the first day? I mean, did someone say, hey, are you interested in this program, or would you consider taking this job, or how did it all start for you?
Yeah. So I started at the Department of Agriculture doing pest detection surveys. So I would go out to farms and gardens throughout the state and put up traps for invasive insect pests and look for plant pathogens. So, I really had kind of a plant production background when I started, and I did that survey work for a year and a half, but it was a temporary position. So a lot of the positions at the Department of Agriculture are seasonal or temporary. It's kind of the nature of this work. So I was always kind of looking out for a permanent position. The hemp program it actually had been operating for about a year, and my supervisor Tony was running the program, but that was not sustainable at all. So they finally got funding to be able to offer a dedicated position for the program, and that opened up and I decided to apply. I wasn't even really sure that I wanted the job. I just thought, well, I'll go for it. And I ended up getting offered the job, and I took it just knowing it was going to be, I mean, nobody had ever had the job before. It was brand new. So I had really no idea what to expect. And it's kind of interesting because my very first day, we had an inspection with the DEA, with our DEA agents, because we used to hold a DEA import registration permit. When the program first started, it was only legal if you're a hemp grower. The only seed you could get to grow was seed that had been imported into the country under the MDA importer registration permit. So as part of that permitting process, we had to submit to an annual registration by the DEA. So that was the very first day, was doing that inspection with them. And I gotta say, it was just kind of exciting and different. And this job has just been like that. Like, everyone in the department knows who we are, and they're always like, oh, here comes Margaret, like, this trouble coming. And it's just kind of fun to have that little bit of notoriety.
See, so I didn't overspeak at the beginning, you see? So that's right. It's really neat. And of course, hemp, everywhere that I go, I do round the world cruises, but I cruise over in the Mediterranean and do transatlantics. And I can talk about a lot of businesses that I've been in, but you drop the word hemp and everything at the table goes quiet, and then the questions start. And, the first question, of course, is, so you're a pot farmer. And then we got to get that straightened out. It's like, no, trust me. It's as far away from that as growing, a guy that grows barley for beer is more of an addictive grower than I am. We're not doing that. And then we start explaining. But it's just an amazing business to be in. It's really fun because there's a story to tell and education that goes on. And it's just an exciting time to be in it. And we are the pioneers right here. Anybody that's on this show, 20 years from now, people are going to look back and we are going to be the pioneers that got.
Absolutely.
That's going to be
absolutely.
That's going to
Actually, we should jump right into that, because this is a pioneering year. There are new rules and conversations happening that are pushing us forward, just like this guy is talking about. Should we jump into that, Margaret? Do you want to talk a little bit about the new rules and what's ahead?
Sure. Yeah. Every year is different. Things change every single year as we get clarification from the federal government. And this year, we're coming to the end of the pilot program, and it probably will change the most between this year and next year than it has in the past. But so really, the whole story kind of starts with, there was the very first farm bill that legalized the pilot programs that was passed in 2014, and every 4 years they have to enact a new version of the farm bill. So in 2018, the farm bill version that passed actually put in kind of a sunset date for the pilot programs for all the states, and created the commercial hemp program. So that passed in 2018, but we couldn't do anything with that until they, released their rules framework. So, the statute is pretty bare bones, and they had to actually flesh it out with the rules. So that took about a year for them to release the interim final rule. And that was released on October 30th of 2019. And so we weren't sure, were we going to have to start operating under those new rules immediately? But it, through the whole process, come to realize that, so what happened was the USDA released the rules, and then each state had to make a decision if they wanted to continue to regulate hemp at the state level, or if they just wanted to give up, all control to the federal government. So in Minnesota, we decided that we did want to continue to regulate hemp at the state level. And in order to do that, we had to draft our state plan for hemp regulation. But essentially the plan had to adhere to all the rules that USDA had released. So this whole past year, we've gone through that process. We wrote our state plan. We submitted it to USDA. We then got response back from them that we had to change certain things because they didn't conform to the rule appropriately. So we submitted another draft to them, came back, and they said, no, you still need to change these certain things. And then finally, the third draft that we submitted, they accepted. So then it was a question of what the timing was going to be. So originally, the expiration date of the pilot program had to be exactly 2 years after they had released the interim final rule, which would be October 31st, so the end of this month. But we, so, a lot of the states were like, well, you can't just change an agricultural program in the middle of a harvest season. I mean, you can't expect farmers to be trying to learn all these new rules and get a new license and all that, in the middle of when they're going to be harvesting. So they actually just passed a extension of the pilot programs last week. I don't know if you guys heard about that. So instead of ending the pilot program at the end of this month, we are going to be able to push it until the end of December. So December 31st is when the pilot program will end, and then the new commercial licensing program will begin on January 1st.
So that's what we'll apply for now on November 1st, will be the new deal.
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct.
Okay. Wow. So once again, this kind of shows that, people in big glass windows, buildings are making rules for people that are out here working. And even that most basic thing of like, oh, we'll just set it on October 31st when, like you say, toward the end, but in the middle of harvest, all of a sudden it's a new game. It's like, what are you thinking? I mean, just that's a pretty basic kind of a thing. So I don't suppose with that kind of a thumbnail on it, there's any chance that the 0.3 is on any kind of a horizon of getting changed.
Yeah, so there are a lot of things that we have issue with the rule, and that's part of the reason why there was so much negotiation with submitting a plan and having it be rejected and then submitting a new one. It was because we basically wrote our plan. The first draft was how we want to run the program in Minnesota, how we've been running it for the past 4 years, the pilot program, and how we think it should be done. And so, there were certain elements of that they rejected. So there are things that we don't like about it, such as the 15-day period. Under the pilot program, we take a sample for the THC testing, and then the farmer has 30 days to harvest after that. Well, now that harvest period window is going to shorten to 15 days, and that's just really hard for us as a program to coordinate all the testing of all those fields. It's hard for the lab to report results in such a short time frame, and it's hard for the farmers to be able to harvest in such a short time period. So the 0.3% number, that's really interesting. I mean, that's probably the thing I hear the most from farmers, is that they are unhappy with the 0.3% number. They think it's too low, and that should be changed. That number 0.3 is actually written in the federal law in the Farm Bill. So it isn't something that can be changed in rule. It would have to be changed by an act of Congress. So that's something where, it's not really under our control to be able to change that number. But what we can change there are certain things we can change that will help with that number, such as one good thing that happened with the rules is that they are asking labs to factor in a measurement of uncertainty when reporting results. So, so essentially, instead of reporting a set number to the grower, we will give them a number, but it will be a range factoring in this measurement of uncertainty. So that, kind of gives a little bit of leeway there. One thing that we recommended and that we'll be implementing is that, the laboratory measurement of uncertainty is actually just one small part of uncertainty in this whole testing scheme. The bigger part of uncertainty is the sampling methodology. So
thank you.
So like, what part of the plant do you cut? How many different plants do you cut? All the natural variability in THC level that exists within a cannabis plant population, that wasn't being factored in. So that is something that we will actually be adding into our measurement of uncertainty. So that will give us some leeway there. And another thing that we're arguing and trying to get past is the ability to remediate or utilize in some way the hot hemp. So any hemp that fails the THC test right now, the only thing that can be done is that it has to be destroyed, completely destroyed, not utilized in any way. Well, that's obviously really wasteful. It's tragic for the farmer. It just doesn't serve a whole lot of good purpose when there are things you can do with a failed hemp crop, and still ensure that it isn't entering, the stream of commerce, which in that like, at an over 0.3% THC level. So so I think if we are successful in being able to negotiate with USDA to allow remediation of hot hemp, that will sort of eliminate the the strict cutoff at the 0.3% level.
Wonderful.
But it
that's
just
really
remains
great.
to be
Yeah.
seen. I mean, but I do think that we're pretty hopeful that things will change, because we have had a lot of conversations with USDA. And so we know that there's been significant pushback on a lot of these issues. It's not just us that aren't happy with it. I mean, it's most other states. There are other states that have actually decided that it's just too difficult and too expensive to be able to run their programs because of the rules. And they've decided as a state that they're not going to do that. So one of the most,
they just wiped it out.
Yeah. So we had heard that like, well, I don't really want to name the state names because I'm not 100% sure of the memory.
They can stay
there were
private.
just a handful of states that were like, yeah, we're not gonna have our own state plan. We're not gonna regulate hemp. But there were just like one or two, and they were small states. I mean, they really didn't have much hemp production to begin with. But one that just released like within the last month and said that they're not going to regulate hemp anymore is New York. So they actually had a pretty robust hemp program at the state level. So I don't know exactly what the decision factors were in that, but to me, that's pretty significant that a state that had that much hemp cultivation within it is just decided to like throw up their hands essentially and say, we're not going to even bother. Like, we can't afford to run the hemp program anymore. And so now, every hemp farmer in New York is going to apply directly to USDA.
Oh, okay. So
and get their license through the federal government. And then USDA is going to have to go out and test all their fields and, oversee hemp cultivation in that state.
Wow.
Interesting.
But, so there's been a lot of pushback against these rules, to the point where they reopened the comment period for the rules, which is pretty unusual that they would do that. So now it's open for comment for a second time, and the second comment period ends on the 8th, so on Thursday. So we are preparing a second comments document to submit to them, and trying to really like flesh out the argument against certain parts of the rule that we don't like, and to really try to communicate like the actual farmer perspective, like just saying like, so our first round of comments, we said like, well, we don't think that we should have to destroy every hot crop because of X, Y, and Z reason. Well, now we're really trying to flesh it out and say like, here are specific examples of farmers in our program who failed and had to destroy their crop, and here's how much they spent on that crop in actual dollar amount. And try to really communicate like, this is incredibly expensive, and just one failed crop, that could be enough to just say like, they're done, like they're not gonna ever grow hemp again.
Well, and to compare it to a farmer in corn who may be able to have off-spec corn and sell it for ethanol production or something else, that there are other options. And yeah, just no option for hemp farmers.
Right. No
The risk
option
is
and no
great.
coverage, no subsidy, no, insurance, no guarantees from the seed vendor, nothing.
Are there any statistics of how many acres or how many growers had to get something trashed this year, last year?
Yeah. So last year we had about 12% of our samples that we collected
Right?
failed
The first time.
the first time.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't have that number with me,
That's okay.
but the destruction of, so the way that we did it last year was we tested by the grow location. So like if you registered one field, we would just take one sample for the field, regardless of how many varieties were planted
But
in there.
about 30 samples when you say one sample, you mean you went
Correct.
around the field and collected about 30 pieces of product. Yeah, okay.
Correct. Yeah. The way that we collect a sample is we walk the whole field kind of in a random pattern, and we randomly select 30 plants, and we take the top 2 inches of the female flowers, take a cutting from each of those 30 plants and put them in one bag. And then when the lab gets the sample, they'll dry it down and then they grind it up in like an industrial grinder. And so, they're homogenizing the sample. So it's really, the reason we take 30 cuttings from that field is to try to get an average or a good average snapshot of the whole field, so that no one individual plant, ends up skewing the sample. So last year we would take one sample, 30 cuttings from that whole field, regardless of if it was one variety or many different varieties. And so because of that, like if we had a field that failed, then a lot of the times, if there was more than one variety grown in the field, then the farmer would usually request us to come out and take a new sample. And in that case, like we would then subdivide the field into whatever lots, whatever varieties there were, and test each variety separately. And usually it would be only one of the varieties that would be hot and would fail. So, we had 12% of our samples fail, but luckily that didn't translate to like all of those representative lots getting destroyed.
But so was there an acreage count or any percentage of ultimate destruction?
Yes, there is, but I don't have that number.
But I mean, just in your recollection, I mean, like 2%, 5%, 6%. Like, was it about half?
It was just a few hundred acres. Like I want to say 100 to 200 acres out of 7,500 acres total.
So a small amount in the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But if
this year
if you
so
got
far,
those acres, yeah.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's a relatively small percentage of the total acreage, but for that individual farmer, it can be like a total loss.
Terrible,
So, yeah. This year so far, I mean, we're still like we're coming off the tail end of our big sampling season, but we're still getting results in. But preliminarily, we've only seen about 5% failure rate this year.
Oh, okay.
So that is a lot better. And I think that it's probably a multiple different factors, but hopefully one of them is that seed vendors and the breeders are getting better and more consistent varieties. Another factor is that there are more people growing for CBG this year. And last year it was like all CBD. This year, you know, there's still majority CBD, but a lot more CBG, and those varieties seem to be much more consistently lower in THC. And then also, I think farmers who have a little bit of experience just being able to really dial in their timing better, and you know, knowing not to let their crops go too long if there's any kind of like chance that they could go hot in the end. Then they're getting better about like, okay, well then we'll move up our harvest date a little bit, and we'll move up the, you know, the state testing date a little bit, and just try to be more on the safer side of things.
We planted a pound of X59 kind of as a trial, and it off on a separate little area, and 2 of them germinated, and 1 of them was a male, so we killed that the first day we figured it out. And then the other one, we just let it grow, and we let it grow, and it had been planted early, so we let it really, really mature. And so, you know, we just for fun harvest. We got 1 beautiful X59 that we played with for a couple of days and destroyed it because, as you know, and for our listeners, we're just a little tiny research and development place here. We're in this to try and learn about genetics and make future plans. We're not a grower like people that have acres and acres, or some people that have hundreds of acres actually. And it doesn't let me kill the call. It just there we go. So that's what we did this year. We've had 6 varieties that we planted, and I think we have 3 plants left that we're just like letting them grow and watching the THC go up in them. And once it gets over, then we just we have a little fun with it, take some pictures and kill it. But boy, we've found some strains that are way better than the Chem Cherry that we had last year as far as making buds. We've got some buds this year that are beautiful, like we've seen others raise on the internet. But boy, that THC just keeps creeping up. And that's what we were doing this year. We were just watching it till it got, you know, that's what, because we have our own testing device. So we were just watching it. And that's what you were talking about earlier. Where do you take it off the plant? If you're testing down, if you think of a Christmas tree, if you're testing down inside by the trunk, it tests way different than it does out on the edges, and it tests way different than it does on the top and on the bottom. And so this is an interesting thing, because if we took the whole plant and chopped it all up and took it to Veronica and got a homogenized sample there, even though they were testing over at the bud, I would tell you that they would be testing under, you know, in the homogenized plant. So this is an interesting thing that's still got to work itself out as the years go by here, and this learning cycle keeps going on, is what's the right amount, even though the bud might get a little high. But when we're taking the whole plant, because there is CBD and now CBG, and we're looking for CBN and all these other things, how can we ignore the THC? Because we don't want it. We're not interested in it. It's not our world. Or does it have to be genetics? Are we just do we have to depend on these genetic guys to just build us a plant that's old news and it's gone? Is that where we have to?
Right.
Is that where we have to be ultimately?
Well, it remains to be seen what the final rule will look like that USDA puts out, and that's going to be a big question mark. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, if there is possibility of remediation of the hot plants, then definitely I think we'll continue to see hemp plants that are bred to be high in CBD and end up, you know, inching up over that THC threshold. But if they hold a hard line and just say, nope, you know, if you test a hemp plant, if it's over 0.3, it's a controlled substance, and it can never not be a controlled substance again. and destruction is the only option, then I do think it is 100% possible for breeders these days
Oh,
to
they can
breed
do,
a hemp plant that has 0 THC.
but
And
it's just going to take some time. It's
it
just
will
going to,
take time and it will take money. And
yeah,
that's the thing, is there going to be incentive for them to develop those and
yeah,
sell them widely, or won't there be?
right.
And we hear all the time that, well, people say like, well, just get rid of the 0.3. That's crazy. Like, we should move it up to 1%. But if you really think about it, that wouldn't solve anything. I mean, you could move the number wherever you want, but let's say we moved it up to 1%. Well, then everything would just
Be
inch
pushing that.
up to 1%, and then you'd be just pushing that constantly
Okay.
and dancing
Okay.
around that level. So um the industry will find a way. They really will. I mean, it's full of the smartest people in the world, and if the money is there, they'll develop varieties that will be compliant. I mean, that's these companies that are selling seeds right now where their clients are failing and having to destroy their whole lots. I mean, they're going to be out of business. They're not going to be selling seed next year. I can pretty much guarantee. Or if they won't be selling the same kind of seed.
Mhm.
So the good players and the smart breeders will eventually dominate the industry. But yeah, it's just what regulatory framework are they going to be incentivized? Like, where is the incentive going to be? And that's been the hardest. I mean, one of the hardest parts about being in the hemp industry so far is that each state had its own pilot program and its own little way of doing things. And, we'd always hear like, well, why are you sampling the top 2 inches? You should be grinding up the entire plant because that's how they do it in Tennessee. Or why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And it's like, we're not in Tennessee, we're in Minnesota. This is how we do it here. So that is so hard I mean, how do you develop like an agricultural industry that covers the whole state if each
Yeah.
state has
Yeah.
these different pockets of rules?
That's right.
And we're still, we're now developing our program based on this interim final rule that USDA has put out. It's not the final rule. So there's just all this uncertainty still, and they're all waiting to see what finally shakes out and becomes permanent, and then we'll see varieties that are going to be compliant. But you're right, it will just take time and money.
Yes.
Veronica, you're shaking your head. I know there's something rattling around in there.
Well, I agree. I think I think that seed companies, will make changes because they'll see great loss and people won't buy those, just like you said, Margaret. And that we also, I really like what you said about CBG. We're already starting to see that. We're seeing varieties that are presenting differently with much lower just THC in the field right now. And I've been really interested in that too. Just talked to a grower this morning. So I think there's a lot of exciting things ahead. For me, I hope that we also see a different way that we look at processing and transportation, because I think products in process is a whole different arena that we could talk about. What do you think about that? And what do you see ahead for opportunities in that space?
Sure. So, I mean, I think part of the question is like transporting of crude oil. I think maybe that's what you're getting at. Like, how do we transport material that's over the 0.3% limit? That is a huge issue right now, is just the process, like what happens during the whole processing and extraction process. We know that through that process, materials go over the 0.3% level and under, and it's all over the place. But there aren't, so we know that, the processors know that, the law enforcement knows that, everybody knows that, but people really try to get assurances, like want me to like give them a stamp of approval, like you're approved to have material that's over 0.3%. But I just can't do that. It's still a controlled substance. But that is a huge thing that needs to get worked out within the next year, hopefully, is a frame, like an actual regulatory framework to allow companies to give them some protection to possess material that is over 0.3%, and just some protocols for how they document their process, how they keep good records of all the THC they produce and destroy, and the methods of destruction, all that. But it's also unrealistic to think of one company handling the entire process of making, distillate all within the confines of this one building. It's just not realistic. That's not really how manufacturing happens. It makes more sense for certain companies to just specialize in THC removal and destruction, for example. But right now, it's just you're taking on a ton of risk by moving that crude oil to those companies that do that. So there definitely has to be some protections there, and a process in place for how, allowing that material to be moved and remediated properly. The legislature in Minnesota is aware of this issue, and not this past session, but the one before, they asked the Department of Agriculture to write a report, with recommendations of how we should regulate CBD processors and hemp processors that are handling this type of hot material. So I didn't write it, but my supervisor, Tony Cordelet, wrote it and submitted it to the legislature this past session. So basically it was a legislative report. We met primarily with law enforcement in Minnesota, and so worked with them. Like, we had some drug task force members, and we had someone from the state patrol, the commercial vehicle inspection division, on there. And they gave us recommendations of like how okay, so you have shipping manifests, and they're standard. So like anytime a shipment of hemp is moving within the state or through the state, like if we pull them over, we can ask for this manifest, and it shows clearly like what's in all the drums. And they don't, like, they're not against it. They just want it to be spelled out and clear. And they want to, like, they're like, just tell us what we need to look for and we'll do it. So it is definitely something we can solve, but now the ball is in the legislators' court, I guess. They've asked for our recommendation, we've given it to them, and hopefully now they'll pass a law.
Exactly.
We had those guys here too. We invited them out, the drug task force guys, not the scale guys or but we had one of the highway patrol lead guys is just a couple miles from me here. And, we've talked this through with them, and we showed them everything that we have, and our tester and what we do and our little bit of processing that we do. Veronica does things by pounds and pounds and pounds. We do it by a little half a cup. That's our size of things. And we talked this through with them, and they're saying the same thing. Look, we don't want to be bothered if some guy is carrying 3 pounds of legal hemp and he's driving through the state. We don't want to take our time and deal with him. But the thing is, how do we know that it's not something that is something we should be dealing with? And we had long and really fruitful conversations with them, and I think that partnership is the greatest thing that we can cultivate. Is that we are not on the other team. We are here to make sure that this is is how you want it, and so that your job out there doing what you do goes as smooth as it can also. And it was a great day for them and for us. I mean, they were scheduled for like 50 minutes and they were here a couple hours. It was really neat.
We too had a great conversation with Fargo Police because we wanted to make sure they understood what we were doing and how we were being, safe and secure in our building. But I like what you said, Margaret. I think that all parties want to see a plan that we both can follow and that we both know this is how this is supposed to be done, and we're both following the rules.
Absolutely.
That just makes life so much easier when we all have a plan. So this has been fantastic. I think we could. It's been 50 minutes, and we could talk for another 50 minutes. Would you be willing to come back again?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And also, the wall behind you is fabulous. I love it. It's like Zoom fabulous.
Do you know what? So we bought this house from a couple, and the guy was actually a broadcaster, like a radio broadcaster for, I don't remember, but some national station. And so this was like his recording studio, and he put up these rugs on the wall for sound, good sound purposes. But I just love it. It makes it so cozy in here.
Oh, it's beautiful. Well, it's perfect for this year.
It is.
It's the right year.
Yeah. I have 3 little boys.
Oh my goodness.
Upstairs. So it does help with sound control.
Wow.
Oh. So hemp isn't the only wild thing you got going on in your life.
No, sometimes I come to work to just get some peace and quiet. It's just different problems. Same,
Let's take a moment and tell anyone that's listening to this, and it may be a long time in the future, but if they're considering raising hemp, what should be there in Minnesota, because that's your bailiwick. What should the consideration be before they take the jump? Obviously, they're going to do the forms and all that kind of stuff, but just in their thought process, what should the consideration be? Should I be a hemp farmer or not?
Yeah, I don't like to really give too much advice or recommendations, but I mean, the best thing that someone can do if they're just thinking about growing it is talking to somebody that's grown it before. And especially like if you can find someone in your local area and just see what they're doing and just hear about, how it went for them. That's the best thing that can happen. I always recommend that they find a buyer or a couple like potential buyers before they buy seed and plant a bunch of acreage, because it's kind of heartbreaking how many people grow it and then ask the question of, okay, well, now can I see a list of buyers? Or it really happens all the time. So I can't stress that enough, is that you need to have a plan for the crop, and a kind of an awareness of what your potential buyers are before you plant and invest a lot of money. But yeah, so applying to the program, the application for 2021 will open on November 1st, and it will be open through April 30th. So it'll be a long time that we'll be accepting applications. And basically you can apply online and pay your fees online, and you will actually register your specific grow or processing locations during that process. So have that in mind, like when you go to apply, that you'll have to enter in your actual like field information. You can make changes to that later on if you need to, but just have that in mind when you're applying. And then all first-time applicants have to pass a criminal history background check. And so that just involves getting fingerprinted at a law enforcement office and then sending the fingerprints into the BCA. And then they send the criminal history background check to us.
I wish they'd let me do that myself. I'm way better rolling my fingers than when someone grabs my hand from behind me and does that. It's like I can do it myself. Really, I'll give you the best set of prints you've ever seen. Yeah.
It is cool on that thing though that it's like not with ink. It's kind of
some of them.
Yeah,
I haven't done that yet.
Still using a lot of the rural offices, but like in Fargo, I'm sure they do it electronically.
Yeah, it was a pretty fancy.
It's real ink up here yet, and then you got to wipe your hands and wipe your hands and wipe your hands, and it's fun. It's fun. Margaret, wonderful having you on the show today. And yes, come back. Let's get into the commercial program a bit so you're real comfortable with it. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about that and just have a great day. Veronica, any final?
No, thank you so much, Margaret, for spending so much time with us. This was fascinating. I really appreciate it, and so do our listeners.
This is another edition of Chat CANNA. We hope that you watch us anywhere that you can. We're on YouTube. Please make us your friend. If you are or subscribe on YouTube, on Facebook, make us your friend. This, of course, a production of Prairie Products down in Fargo. Hit them up at prairieproductsnd.com and CANNA RHX. And you can see all of the past shows at CANNARHX.com, chatcanna.com. We are everywhere on the internet. And we look forward to our continuing study, learning, experimentation, and finding out about this great product called hemp. My name is John Reitmeyer. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning for another Have You Heard? See you, everybody. Don't go away. Margaret, we'll talk to you in a minute. We'll see everybody else tomorrow morning for the next show.